Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Shindig podcast brought to you by the Red River Archaeology Group. I'm your host, Dr. Tom Horn, and I'm joined as ever by my co-host, producer, editor extraordinaire, Luke Barry. Luke, how are you?
Good. You, Tom?
Yes, I'm well, and I'm particularly well because we've got an absolute classic
Mhm.
episode today. It's on the First World War. We've got Simon Verdegem, a world class, a truly world class archaeologist whose vocation, his calling is to work on the amazing World War I sites of Flanders.
Mhm.
So that is Ypres, that's Messines Ridge, that's all the kind of most famous battles. Passchendaele tend to be around this salient that existed around the town, the city of Ypres in Flanders. And what we're going to actually start doing now is we're going to show you just a little carousel of some of the images that you're going to
Mhm.
see, and you're going to see more than this throughout this enhanced version if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to this as a podcast, we really do recommend that you also watch this as our YouTube version because I think the ones to really discuss, we've got, the data is incredible. We talk about archaeology, talk about commercial archaeology, which
Mhm.
Simon is a commercial archaeologist, like we are at the Red River Archaeology Group. You've got the amazing images that you'll see going past of, where the cartridges that are certain date stamps on them, and you can tell where the Germans were, the French were, the British were at certain points throughout the First World War between 1914 and 1918. And I know you're particularly impressed with, the sort of perils of even, First World War, but also the perils that you get as an archaeologist, a commercial archaeologist working, say, on a housing development in
Yeah.
Flanders now. So it's the Iron Harvest, isn't it, Luke, that kind of
It is.
impresses you?
This was this podcast kind of really brought home to me the human aspect of not only the people involved in the actual war itself, but the people who are tasked with uncovering all of these facts and artifacts and stuff about it. Because um, in this podcast, you'll see the emotion involved in this, and that in order to tell the stories that archaeologists have to tell, they have to place themselves into these trenches, into the minds, I guess, of the people who they're discovering the stuff about, and that can't be easy because you have to think of these horrible conditions that people have been living in, and but it's what people are doing to bring these amazing stories to us and letting us bring them to you, the listeners, the viewers of the Shindig.
Yeah, and this professionalism, yeah, you can see there's an emotion in it as well, and you've got to consider the safety. We're just talking
Mm,
about the unexploded ordnance, this iron harvest that we were talking about earlier. But a part of the issue with the ordinances is the fact that the preservation is so good in some places.
mm,
And just as it were, left yesterday, there's a table and chair from I think one of the German trenches that
mm,
you'll see on this, and we'll talk about in the podcast that it's just the preservations again is just like you can see people sitting at that chair and on that table, and they're the trenches as well, incredible, the tunnels, the concrete tunnels and bunkers that you see, the wattle linings of the trench walls, the corrugated iron still in places as well, the duck boards, the A-frames, the Pickelhaube, the classic German helmets, that you'll see on this as well. The preservation is incredible, but you've got the human interest stories as well. The
mhm,
Captain Walkers, when Simon's talking about tracking down the stories of these individuals as well, the French tirailleurs as well, the you know the stories that Simon brings out are what we try and do in archaeology and what we're trying to do with this podcast. So I think as a podcast, it and as public archaeology and what the Shindig is, it really this does everything that we want it to do. And Simon is a brilliant communicator. His
mhm.
ex feed, and he's now on Blue Sky as well. Just follow that, because if you like what you see here on the YouTube channel and like what you hear as a podcast on the YouTube, this is really, I think, the gold standard of outreach that the Simon and his colleagues are doing, and hopefully that we're emphasizing that with our public outreach through the Shindig as well. So there's not really much more to say because it's really just worth listening to what Simon has to say. And yeah, I'll leave it there. And if Luke wants to sort of take it away and give the final introduction.
No, I just want to say, let's get straight into this because it is an absolutely fascinating interview. So make sure to stay tuned till the end.
So, Simon, thank you very much for joining us today. And I think I always like to start the podcast not assuming that everybody knows. I just say what we know, what you know, since you're the expert in First World War and First World War archaeology. But could you just give our listeners who are maybe new to this? I mean, I think most people will know a little bit about the Western Front and trench warfare, and maybe in the Flanders and places like Ypres. But could you just give a little sort of background? What do we mean by the Western Front and trench warfare, and then maybe just a little bit about the trench warfare in the regions that you work in?
Well, the Western Front in general goes from our Belgian coast all the way up to Switzerland. It's one line of trenches, very vast, several lines behind each other on both sides of no man's land. So the no man's land is the center in between those lines, where both armies or enemies are facing each other. For us, if we zoom in a bit to where I work, that is limited to the Belgian sector, which goes, as I said, from the coast all the way up to the French border. And then you have two kind of sectors within that where we work in. You have the Ypres salient, where you have the most actions during the war. And then more up to the north, there's the sector around the Yser, the river Yser, which is a sector that was most of the war under control of the Belgian army on one side and, of course, the German army on the other side. But for two reasons, that was less active looking at it from battles and fights and actions, because there's two main reasons. The Belgian king tried to keep his army out of those actions most of the time. And of course, because of the inundations, vast areas of that battlefield were underwater. It wasn't that easy to go over the top and to launch any big attacks. But nevertheless, there were some. Of course, there were trenches there as well on both sides of the water and the inundations. So we do find stuff there as well. But around Ypres and Messines, more to the south, there's two big salients. So we have the Ypres salient, which is an arch around the city of Ypres that was controlled. So the city of Ypres was in the center, and the Germans had a view over the battlefield where the Allies were from different angles. So they had a kind of controlled that area. They had a good view of the communication lines in the back. So it was a difficult situation for the Allied armies over there. They also had lower grounds, and the Germans had higher grounds. So that was also, from a strategic perspective, the Allied, Commonwealth, and French armies there were on a less favorable situation. More to the south, you had the Messines Bridge, which was also some kind of a salient, a bit smaller. There was the other way around, were the Germans controlling Messines and Weizstraten, but because they were on a higher ground, it was not the same disadvantage they had as the Allies in Ypres. So those two areas are the areas we work in most of the time. We do have some projects more to the north, but from an archaeological perspective, there's also a difference because up north we were on lower grounds. Water table levels were higher as well. Also during the war, because of the inundations, but also because that's the way it is in those lower coastal areas. And that's why trenches weren't that deep. So trenches were built mainly above ground there with sandbags and walls of dirt. And that's why archaeologically there's less to be found because they didn't dig that deep. And after the war, when everything was cleaned up, it just ended up in the topsoil, and it's not that easy to find relics compared to Ypres, the Ypres salient. Some of the trenches were really deep, and archaeologically that's better because it's deeper underground, so the preservation is just completely different, and we find more in that area. If you go more to the south, even in France, where you have again a different soil, some of the trenches are even deeper than in Flanders, and then you find even deeper trenches. So the view that we have from contemporary photographs, seeing soldiers in deep trenches, that's seen from the inside. But if you look at it from the outside, in Flanders, at least half of that trench is above ground. So what we find is only the bottom, sometimes it's 50 centimeters, half a meter of trench, but we never find, or almost never find, the higher parts of the trench because that is just erased after the war.
And but you say that the place where you've done a lot of the work is Ypres, the salient. So it's almost like a sort of bulge that sticks out to the east of Ypres. Mm-hmm. And so there are three kind of main phases of the battle, kind of known as, well, 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how I'm doing a little bit of reading beforehand. But Passchendaele kind of being the third battle, and the first battle being after they generally are trying to outflank each other towards the coast, and they always fail. But could you just tell us a little bit about maybe those battles or any sort of key points, or you can concentrate on the first, second, or third, and which one's most important for your work?
Well, they all have their how to say, a kind of an interest or a different way of looking at it archaeologically. To start in the beginning, you have, like you said, the race to the sea, where they try to outflank each other, and then that's where the stalemate began, where the trench warfare started at the end of 1914. So by the end of October 1914, they ended up around Ypres, and then a little bit more to the north, Bozinge and stuff like that. Those villages is where they were not able anymore to outflank each other, and that's where that trench warfare started. But of course, those trenches weren't there from the start. Trench warfare is not new. In 1914, soldiers had to dig in if they were not able to advance anymore. So that's what they did. They started to dig in first individually or with 3-5 soldiers each in foxholes and slit trenches, small trenches, not connected, not fast lines running for miles and miles. And at the point where the war didn't get into a movement anymore, they had to enhance their positions. They had to make it more comfortable for themselves. They had to make it safer to move from one position to the other. And that's how they started to connect those slit trenches. And that's how, at first, very ad hoc trenches kind of emerged. And that's an interesting perspective because archaeologically, they're less easy to find as well because they're often not recognized as easy as a trench with a lot of wood and construction and stuff in that. And secondly, a lot of them are erased in later phases when they did start to build the trench into a big trench network. They started to dig deeper and they started to connect the trenches, and then they added all kind of features. And that original small slit trench is then often erased, and archaeologically there's nothing to be found anymore. So we get enthusiastic if we find in between all those trenches those small relics of those first months of trench warfare, because they're rather unique, let's say. Of course, in the areas where after the first battle, the front did move a bit more, then you do have some features that were preserved. But on positions where from the end of 1914, the front didn't move until 15 or 16 or 17. Yeah, because of those the work that did that those trenches, the enhancement of the trenches, and of course artillery and stuff like that, that erased a lot of those early features. And there's one side in particular where we had the luck of, and it's still one of the most significant sites that we did looking at trench construction. It was a German position, and there we found slit trenches, then slit trenches that were connected, but you could still tell the difference between the slit trenches, the original slit trenches, and the connections, because they had different depths. Then for some reason they did move to another position to start a new trench, and then probably a few months later another. So we have like 4 or 5 trenches on a small area where we can see the evolution of trench construction just on one side. And for us, looking at how that evolution is to be found archaeologically, that was very interesting, because normally all those phases would erase the earlier ones.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, because I think we kind of tend to think of it in the set phase of when they've been developed for 2 or 3 years, and we don't think. I saw some fascinated photographs on your Twitter, which we'll give the links out to, because the photography and the stories in there are fantastic. But you've got the sort of shell holes that have been connected by these slit trenches as well. And are they still doing that throughout the war? Presumably, it's not. Again, we maybe have this image of like the Germans are several meters underground concrete bunkers. The British ones have timber A-frames and duckboards. But I imagine, especially in 1918 as well, when things are moving, are the Germans and the Allies sort of having to sort of rediscover these sort of 1914 sort of modus vivendi ways of creating these sort of slit trenches? Do you get any evidence of that in your work of the later phases?
Yeah, they're difficult to find within the original battlefields because of the destruction, and it's very difficult to find out or to date certain features within the devastation and the trench and the craters and stuff like that. But when you look at the battlefield from the end of 1918, where the Germans were pushed back, and they ended up in an area that was not destroyed by artillery and that had the open fields again, there you can see the same thing coming back, where they had to dig in and on times when the attack stalled or anything, and then you can see those small slit trenches coming back. The difference is they never evolved to the trenches again, because the war ended up ended eventually on the 11th of November 1918. So, but you can see that, and that's what I meant in the beginning, that trench warfare isn't new during or in the First World War. It's just a military tactic that was already there in the mid 19th century and maybe earlier, but the increasement of firing power, they just had to dig in. And from the moment that you move and you cannot advance anymore, you have to dig in. And that's something you see at the beginning of the war and also at the end. And what you said about connecting the craters, that's something that we see from areas in the 1917, 1918 battles, when they go over a battlefield that is completely destroyed, when there's almost nothing but shell holes. And there's no space to dig in anymore. But why would you dig in if there's a lot of holes that you can just use, and then the holes are there and you just connect them? And sometimes they improve the shell craters. They add something to the sides to prevent them from slipping in or staying out of the mud. And They put some sandbags on the sides and stuff like that. And that's what you find from that 1917-18 battlefield.
And when they do, when they do have a chance, just at the beginning of the podcast, just to get an idea of both sides to dig in, and and it's the static period. Are the characteristics or the cliches that we think of, the Germans are more likely to dig deeper, maybe use concrete, they have wattle on the walls. There's a great recreation in Pollok Park in Glasgow through the university when they recreated a British trench and an Allied trench. And are there characteristics? Do the British always try and put in A-frames and the duck boards and sandbags, and the French and the Belgians similar? The Allies have a sort of way of doing things that develops, and the Germans have their own way, or is that just something that we get from movies?
To a certain point, that's a correct perspective. That's a correct view. And that's what we see if we just go back a bit. So by the end of 1914, you have the stalemate, then you have the Second Battle of Ypres. That doesn't change that much. But besides that, the front lines move a few kilometers to the west. And that from that point on, they start to enhance that complete network. That's the moment when the trench warfare, as we know it at this point from the First World War, is starting to come live. The frontline trenches are connected with other trenches to the back, to second line, third line, and stuff like that. And that's those vast networks of trenches on both sides is from that period from 1915 till 1917. Other areas you have the same positions from 14 to 17. It depends a bit on the position in the salient, and then that's the moment they actually build the trenches. They construct the trenches. They fortify the trenches. They add floorboards. They add walls. They prevent them from collapsing. And then you can see that they have problems with the water, and they have to find solutions for staying out of that mud and out of the water. And that's when A-frames are coming up. And that view of A-frames, we did find a lot of those trenches, that school book, textbook trench with the perfect A-frame, duckboards on top, and corrugated iron or whatever on the sides. Those trenches are there, but only to a certain percentage. The same on the German side, the wattle and the long floorboards. That schoolbook trench from the German side is also there, but there's so many variations depending on the type of soil, if there's many actions in that area, if they have to do a lot of after destruction, they have to repair a lot and stuff like that. That's all kind of all stuff that that influences the way the trenches are built. We did do we tried to make a study on trench warfare and trench construction, and our setup was to make a typology of Allied trenches and German trenches, but we had to end up with saying that it's not possible because there's too many variations. There would have been a typology that was too complex. So we started to look at it from the perspective of not how they were built, but why and how they evolved. So you have, like I said, you first have the ad hoc trenches, and they start to add stuff, and they start to and it depends on, as I said, on the region. A trench in France where you have the hard underground, and it was not necessary to put anything on the floors on the walls, but the way the trench was used was just the same as in Flanders. So you cannot make a topology because that's the same trench. It's just a situation that is different. And that's how we started to look at it. So there's like 5 steps, and I can't recall them all by head now, but it's from that first step, digging in, then trying to elaborate that trench to, and then you also have trenches that they just started to, and that's trenches more at the back, and that's something that you also see at both sides. The trenches behind the front lines that were constructed in case of a breakthrough. Those were the textbook trenches. They were perfect. All the dimensions were exactly the same. All traverses and fire bays were exactly the same length and stuff like that. The same depth. Everything was used as it was evolved, and it was in the textbooks and the field manuals. And that's there you can find those trenches because they had the time and the space to do that. It's almost impossible to do that at the front lines because you had to do the work by night under the view of the enemy. Your trench was destroyed the day after you constructed it. It evolved from those positions that were there, and at the beginning when they dug in, they didn't think, oh, I have to dig in here and the other one there because we have to make a textbook trench. No, you just dig in and then you connect it, and that's how or why those trenches at the front line are more that ad hoc. They just emerged and they connected, and that's how they ended up the trenches they were, and then you can see a lot of improvisations as well. In the beginning they used whatever they could find. We found doors, even what's the English word? Some kind of a plow that they put on the floor. Anything to keep them out of the mud. Hay, bricks, everything that was to be found in the destroyed farmhouses. We even found a chair and a table that they used in the trench just to make it comfortable for themselves. So, and then you can see that when time and war continued and progressed, they started to bring in construction material from the back, and then you see the evolution from improvisation to more thought through, and then is when you see the wattle coming up and the duck boards, and then the A-frames, which were a later phase of the duck boards. Because in the beginning they just tried to put the duck boards a bit higher, and they dug a small canal underneath it, but that just slipped and it filled in, and it was not usable, and that's why they used the A-frame. We saw duck boards 4 or 5 on top of each other, just trying to stay out of that water. We have a German trench set in scenes where they, I think we have 4 levels of getting those the walking level higher out of the water. And that's also interesting because you can see the different types that they use. At the beginning, you just have the long floorboards, and at the end, the latest phase is a copy of the duck boards, the British duck boards that they copied and that they also used. So they learned from each other, probably during night scouting and how do you say? And they went over the top at night and then to find out what's on the other side, and they just learned. Or if when they conquered the trench and then they saw that's interesting, and that you can see that on both sides that there's kind of the good stuff that they copied from each other.
Start to sort of everyone starts to sort of trend towards the same solution after a while, and
they still have their own habits that they continue to use, but there's other stuff that at the end they were just in the same. It's the same situation for both of them. Yeah, both sides.
Sorry, Luke. Yeah, sorry. Go.
I'm gonna jump in there. With the First World War, it's kind of something that the average person feels they're quite familiar with because there's so much, I guess, written firsthand in terms of poetry, letters home, all that kind of stuff. For someone like me, who only knows very basics of stuff about the First World War, from your work, what would you find that would surprise the average public about what they might not know about it?
It's something that I don't know if I can point to an exact thing that would surprise anybody, but the thing is that we often get told that why do you have to excavate it? It's all known, as you said. It's in so many books and so many witness accounts and so many. But many of those histories are written from a broader perspective. And okay, you have those accounts that are more personal, but they don't go into details about trench construction. What we have on trench construction are those field manuals or photographs. But there's so many details that we get out of that archaeology that learns us how those guys had to. Yeah, it's easy to say that's how you have to construct a trench until you are there, and then you have to improvise. And I think that's the great thing about archaeology is that you get into that smaller history, if you know what I mean, not the big history of numbers and 1,000 men going over the top there and 500 there, and they had so many. We see that that history from a very small perspective of those soldiers being in that trench and having to
their actual everyday existence, pretty much.
They're having to live there. That's the nice stuff about how did they improvise, but also what did they left behind? Very personal stuff. What were they interested in? How did they make it comfortable for themselves living in trenches like that? And I think that is what it different, or how the archaeology differs from the history writing.
Luke, just while I'm thinking about that there, one of our previous guests, Dr. Terence Christian, does Second World War air crashes, usually sort of, young Americans that have crashed in Scotland was his focus. And it's when you get the letters home from their parents saying, after the person has died, saying, when will I get my son back? And then they get given the list of what was in their footlockers, and it is things like playing cards and their newspapers and their chewing gum and $200 or whatever like that. And we'll talk in a wee while. I'll let Luke ask the next question, but we'll talk in a little bit about your kind of motivation for finding these stories and identifying these people. But sorry, look, I interrupted you there. Just at the moment, one of the best things about the Shindig is it makes you think about research and other podcasts and other interests that we have. So sorry, look, you were saying.
I guess I was going to ask two questions. One, how, when you're on these excavations and doing these projects, do you get a sense of the emotional toll it took on these people? Is there, or do you have to remove yourself from that entirely to look at the scientific aspect of it?
It does get personal, because I don't think there's any way to get closer to them as the way we do, to actually stand in those trenches, to sometimes even smell the trenches, to get to be in that mud. And I often say to my colleagues, especially the younger ones, that when we're working on a rainy day and we're getting cold and muddy, and you can see that they're getting tired of the situation, and then we just say, but tonight you go home and then get a shower and warm up and be in a safe house, and tomorrow you will be back. But those guys were here for days and days just in this mud, and then you don't even have the fear of an artillery bombardment going to start, or snipers watching you, or whatever the situation was they were in. So yeah, it does get emotional, and we'll probably get into the finding of fallen later, but that's an even more emotional part of the work. But at some point, you have to kind of switch that off when you're working and doing the job you have to do and trying to focus on the details. But there is always a time to reflect later, or
it's probably
I'm driving home.
If you're telling a story like that, it's impossible to remove yourself entirely from the emotion, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I think it makes us a better archaeologist for this job if we do it this way as well. If we just don't do this as a job because it has to be done.
You said there that people aren't shooting at you and there's not that danger, but there is a level of danger to what you're doing. These are deep excavations. How do you deal with that? And what are your processes for dealing things like UXOs and deep excavations, as we mentioned?
For the deep excavations, we use the safety measures that need to be done. And sometimes that means that the archaeology cannot be done as we would like it to be done.
Yeah.
Because you have to put how you call it walls
shoring up the sides.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a case in Rijkswater where we found several stairs going into a deep dugout, and they went, I think, 4 meters deep because we were in a street, so we could not go wider. So we couldn't go all the way down as well because they went deeper outside of the area that we could excavate. But 4 meters deep in a trench that is only 2 to 3 meters wide is not safe. So we had to put walls in and stuff like that, and it blocked the view of those well-preserved staircases. And I hated the fact that I couldn't take nice pictures of a well-preserved stair, but it was choosing between being in a dangerous situation and it's just not worth if you put yourself back a bit and reflect, it's just not worth the risk. And then we recorded as well as possible. And looking at it now, we still have fantastic images of those stairs, and I think we found 6 or 7 stairs next to each other from one giant dugout. So it was still a great result. So, but often it's not going that deep. So if we just have trenches, then it's we can do. And most of the time, we go all the way and stay safe without taking those extra measures. UXO wise, that's a different story, of course. We don't go out if we're on the battlefield. We don't go out without a UXO specialist. There's always one with us. We sometimes we do let them scan in advance, but I'm not a big fan of that because it's just not possible to pinpoint the difference between just big chunks of metal and actual shells. So if you have just one scan full of possible hits, and it just delays the work, and it's I know situations where they wanted to go in advance, but then they destroy all the archaeology. So what we often do is that they're with us at the excavator, and we do it very slowly, layer by layer, and they scan with just a hand metal detector or whatever equipment they need or they think is most feasible at that moment. And whenever we have a hit, they remove it so that we can continue. But
and this is known as, I mean, farmers would call it the iron harvest, isn't it? This is what we're talking about.
Yeah, and farmers look at us like, oh, we're so used to it. Why do you have to have specialists with you and stuff like that? People from the area are so familiar with finding the iron harvest that they often forget the dangers. But yeah, we're in a working environment. We just cannot put our people at risk.
How dangerous
so
would it be? Like, what are the actual chances of an injury or death?
Has it happened? Have you been
Yeah.
an excavation where something has exploded or has started to react with the chemicals or something?
I think I had 2 or 3 situations where phosphor started to,
Okay.
it comes into the air again, it gets
Mm.
open, it starts to smoke, and you have to go away, because if it would hit you, it burns into everything. And there's only 2 ways then. If the excavator operator reacts quick enough, can put earth on top of it again, and it stops. And I had a situation like that too, because he was so quick to see it that the situation was freezed until the army, the EOD unit arrived to remove it. And there's 2 other situations where we just had to pull back and waited for a few hours until smoke was gone, and then EOD came in to remove it. It happens, but that's only. We also had 1 or 2 cases with gas, but I was not. It was at the moment that the archaeologists were gone, when they were closing up the area again, and there was one that was missed. That happens, of course, as well. And then it started to leak, so they had to clear the area. And that's why we always have how do you call it, a wind flag that points that shows us the wind direction. So when we go on site, we also have the briefing, and we point to the people. Today the wind is coming from that direction. So if anything happens, move to the other side, out of the wind, because otherwise you go with the gas and you cannot escape it. So you always have to go the other side. But we never had explosions, luckily. But to answer your questions about the danger, there are people that were killed by. Just I think 2 or 3 years ago, there were some people on a construction site that found it, and they started to handle it, and they dropped it, and it exploded.
And I think this is the time. I know we're talking about the dangers now, but the dangers then, of course, were hundreds of thousands, millions of people being killed. The casualty figures on the Ypres salient are, I mean, maybe you can maybe go into and the next answer in terms of that. I was reading about it today, and the numbers are still absolutely shocking. I mean, this is before. I mean, look in the Second World War. The reason the Second World War was like it was is because people decided to use armor as much as possible instead of people, particularly on the Western Front. That was a lesson that certainly the Allies learned, that they just weren't going to use mass troops again because of what happened. But I want to take Simon back to April 2012 in Messines. You've got a lovely bit I found on your Twitter when you talk about that moment in April 2012 when you found your first soldier, in terms of the human remains, and you can just tell us how that's really kind of determined the path that your research and your research interests have taken since then.
When I became an archaeologist, I always wanted to do First World War archaeology. I studied history first at university. When I finished that, I wanted to add the archaeology degree to be able to dig into and to dig up First World War features. But at that point, I had no clear view of if I wanted to specialize within that type of archaeology, until I found my very first soldier on the excavation that I was leading. And that was the first time because I saw it being done during internships before, and I did see medieval graveyards being dug up, and I've been there. But my first time actually excavating a soldier and being that close to him changed my view on that. And I remember that he had dentures with a gold teeth, and all kinds of personal effects with him. And because of that, we started to look into him and trying to find out who he was. And we didn't succeed with him. But the fact that, one, you get that close to somebody, you work on him for often 1-2 days, being on your knees with that body, cleaning it up, taking the photographs, everything that is necessary, recording all the details. And then also after that, you look at the finds and the artifacts and his personal stuff. And then the idea of being able to maybe find out who he is, that changed something for me. But of course, then that was 12 years ago. Still a junior archaeologist, was my first big excavation, so it changed. But at that point, I didn't have the. I was still just following work, continuing. I still did some other older periods as well at that time, but that was the beginning. And then especially if we were invited to his the reburial afterwards, and all that appreciation from, it was from New Zealand, from the New Zealand Army and the embassy, of us finding the remains. And even though he was not identified, we did get him out of the cold, and he was now buried, or he's still buried with his comrades on a cemetery. And I can still, and I often do, go and visit his grave. And that started, my interest, and that's kind of odd maybe saying it, but an interest in specializing in that kind of archaeology. And I think it completely changed 2 years later when 4 years later is when we found the remains of Captain Walker, because he was actually identified, and for me he was the first that I was able to identify. In between, I did find, I think, maybe 4 or 5 other remains on other sites, but again, it was not. We were not able to identify him, and authorities also weren't able to identify him. But in that time, in Messines, but also before Walker, those were different times compared to now. I still remember at Messines, we finished the excavation, and then the police is always, we have to warn the police in advance when we find the remains, because they have to come in and they have to confirm that it's not a criminal fact, that the remains are actually from deceased soldier. After they have confirmed that, we can continue. When we're finished, we have to hand out the remains and the finds. We have to hand that over to the police again, and it's their task to give it to the Belgian Wargrave Commission, and then it goes from there to Commonwealth Wargrave Commission, or the French or the German authorities. But now we have time to take it back to the office and to clean it properly and to investigate everything and take photographs. At Messines, they came with a body bag and they just put everything in at that point, and we were not able to clean any of the artifacts, and they did it afterwards, but not the way we would do it now. So in those years, things have changed a lot. And the excavation where we found Captain Walker was in that period when it started to shift, and we were already able to, not at the offices, but at the barracks, on site, we were able to clean the artifacts, and we had a physical anthropologist that was allowed to look at the remains, so we could establish age and stature and stuff like that. That helped us a lot to narrow down that list. And then Walker, yeah. I'll never forget that we pulled out the medallion with his initials on, and he was an officer. So I think they were from the battalion from that day. They had 196, if I recall correctly, missing from just one day, and 8 or 9 of them were officers. My list went from 196 to 9, and then of course with the initials, it was looking back at it rather easy. But yeah, it was kind of a handwriting inscription, so it wasn't easy to read. So I had to look into all the combinations. I'll never forget the moment from my hitting the right record and seeing that it was him. And that was later confirmed when he had the same initials on his binocular case. And then, yeah, we had a confirmed ID. And from that point on, it went quick. We would get connected to the family and the gratitude and from them. And that reconfirmed my my mission. Let's call it that way. It's kind of sometimes it's a passion, but it's also some kind of sometimes I get an obsession to find them and to find and as I said before, you never get closer to them being in the trenches, but being with them for days in the field, cleaning, touching their remains is you kind of get to know them in a way. That's probably strange for people to hear that.
No, I don't. I think, having done, B-17s that have crashed into Scottish mountains, and you find a personal effect, and you've got photographs of them, you've got letters from their mum asking when their body might get brought back, and there are moments like that when you think, this is a bunch of teenagers that have crashed and not been discovered for 6 months, and when we were there, the person who discovered the bodies was still alive, so we could speak to them, and so absolutely no. I think that personal connection is very much, and you're the professional archaeologist, but then you're also a person and thinking, I'm 30, 40, whatever, and this is a 17-year-old, and that, I mean, I think I'd like to concentrate on the people and the people you found. I mean, there was a post relatively recently on your amazing X or Twitter feed, and it was the cemetery at Saint Charles de Maupertuis. There were 4 Allied French soldiers. Could you tell us a little bit about that and the whole process? And there's some incredible photographs of that as well that people can look in your feed.
So it was last week that there was a ceremony at the cemetery, the French cemetery. 2 cases, 4 sets of remains that were reburied, and they were found on 2 different sites. The first one was already back in 2019, and the other 2 were in 2021, so about 3 years ago. It took so long because the first ones from 2019 were found at Dixmuide, so that's more up north at the Belgian sector. And in 1914, Dixmuide, which was on the eastern bank of the Isère River, it's kind of the Ypres for the Belgians. At the end of 1914, they tried to hold on to the town, but they eventually had to give it up and pull back to the western bank. So Dixmuide came into German hands, but for a few weeks or days of heavy fighting, there was a kind of a small salient around the town as well. And Belgians were helped by French troops. You had French Marines, but also colonial troops that came in, and regular French infantry as well. And we found 2 but on that site, actually, there was an excavation in 2016 where they found 3 Belgian soldiers and 2 French already. I think even 4 Belgians, and 3 of them were identified with 3 and not 2. There's one that wasn't identified, which was already huge because it was the first sets of remains from Belgian soldiers since the 50s, and already 2 of them identified, so that was big. But on the side of that area that was developed, as you know, commercial archaeology, you get trial trenching, and you have there's areas that are selected and areas that aren't selected. Sometimes everything, but in that case, there was no evidence of large archaeological features. But of course, you're on a battlefield, but we have to select, and we cannot excavate everything. There was 2 areas where there was no excavation, but when they were doing UXO clearance a few years later, they hit those 2 sets of remains, and then we came in to excavate just the remains. And one of them was a tirailleur Senegalais, which is a North African troop. He was, well, it says Senegalais, which is Senegal, but some of them were also coming from Algeria and Morocco. So it's North Africa in general. And we know that they were there in that same period. And he had a box with him where there was a prayer beads wrapped around it, and in that box there was a piece of paper with text on it, and that's why he was hauled back for reburial, because we are trying to find out what's on the paper, and that's not an easy thing. So that's still not finished, but the French decided to bury him anyway. And normally they bury all the personal effects with them, and now they're holding back that piece in hope they can change the name back in a name or whatever we find out on the paper. But that paper apparently was, because the writing on it is in Arabic, and it's from a shaman that wished him luck. It's kind of a good luck charm that he had with him for him personally. And because it's a personal thing that the shaman spoke out on him, we still hope that there might be a name or anything on it. But yeah, that's hopefully some news that we can bring in the future. The other one was a
jump in there.
chasseur.
Would good luck charms be a common thing that you'd find on people?
Yes. But
I guess you're going to get lots of religious style good luck stuff.
Religious
Is there anything
stuff,
outside
definitely.
of that?
But it's not always easy to recognize it as good luck charm. Something that is good luck charm for someone is not always. I don't see that always as a good luck charm. So I'm quite convinced that we found stuff that we couldn't understand, or that we just saw as a regular object that was a good luck charm for somebody else. But in this case, it was very obvious, because it's a known thing. And we had colleagues working from us from Syria, and that's how they could read Arabic, and they contacted other people that they knew, and they identified this as this kind of typical. And apparently now at the reburial, I was talking to Piet Gillis, who was the curator for the Flanders Fields Museum until a few years ago, who knows, he's just a walking dictionary on the First World War, and he knows a lot about French army and colonial stuff. And apparently there's text of witness accounts of people saying about those tirailleurs Senegalais that they had to bring there. I don't recall the name, but it's written down somewhere that they always have this kind of stuff with them. So for them, it was very typical. So hopefully.
Yeah, sorry, and the personal effects and the survivals we'll go into that, but the fact that you're getting paper, because there's newspapers and you do get quite a lot of, sort of paper and very delicate things that survive, or just some examples of that? Because I mean, I think the one I saw in your Twitter feed was parts of the Australasian newspaper, I think, in one site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do have in some situations extremely well preserved objects, but it all depends on the type of soil and what it's covered with, in what depth it is found. And for example, that tirailleur Senegalais and the other one were found, I think, only 200 meters apart. The tirailleur was his bones, but also everything else was very well preserved, and the other one there's nothing left. Even the bones were so much deteriorated that there was almost no research possible. There was a few buttons left that identified him as a chasseur, and I think only his rifle, but all the rest was gone. With the tirailleur, we found his belt and his ammo pouches and no shoes, because apparently they were not wearing shoes. And in this case, it was confirmed by the archaeology. But yeah, those guys came in barefoot and they just went into trenches barefoot.
Wow.
Because they found it more comfortable to fight on their bare feet.
Do we know a reason behind that, except for the comfort, or was it?
No, because I think some of them got equipped by it, but they didn't like to, because they were just used to do it barefoot.
Was that with? I mean, I always think with when you see the Scottish soldiers and a lot of the maybe Canadian and Australasian units that wear Scottish dress, and I mean that's. I mean, do you ever? I don't know if you ever find. I mean, being a Scottish person and having I think on my mother's side, someone who went out to New Zealand before the First World War was an artist with some of their paintings, and then, as far as we know, went back and fought in the First World War. But I mean, do you find bits of national dress that you find and things that you can then say, this is from a particular type of unit, or is it generally sort of badges, or do you find sort of things that are kind of that will hint towards where troops are from?
In some cases, if preservation is good, we do find. I think last year there were 2 Glasgow Highlanders that were reburied, and on one of them we found a tartan almost complete. So you could actually see the typical color scheme for a different type of tartan, and you could recognize it as him being and there's another case that I cannot say much about because it's still in research, but there's 2 Scottish soldiers that we found 2 years ago, and both of them had the complete kilt was still on him. Even the sporran was still there, and on their I think was it tam o' shanter that we were wearing, and you could also see the color scheme that was very typical. So yeah, those kind of things do preserve.
And I think that brings us back round to, I mean, your work and your interest in identifying people, and you with a colleague, Raf de Brandt, you set up Skylarcs, and then also you had an amazing project known as Dig Hill 80. So I'd just like you to talk a little bit about Skylarcs and then get into Dig Hill 80, which is a huge subject in and of itself.
Skylarcs is, as you said, it's a non-profit that me and Raf set up a few years ago. And we set it up as because then we wanted to get a grant to do a study on the soldiers of the First World War archaeologically. That study is about to be published anytime now. It's in Dutch, but it will be out soon. And that's because Flemish government, since I think 3 or 4 years, every year annually they have a certain amount that is divided into 5 to 6 projects where they can do synthesis of archaeology. The idea behind it is that because of commercial archaeology and the Malta archaeology, a lot of the archaeological results are divided and split up into all those small excavations. And they want to bring that together in all kinds of subjects. And that's what we did with the trench construction. And we wanted to do that also looking at what we learn from soldiers' remains, not just the identification process, but what does it learn us on burial practices, on evolution of those practices during the war, all kinds of stuff. If there's differences between nationalities and stuff, and that's something we tried, and that you will find in that study. But to be able to get that grant, we needed some kind of an institution outside of our regular jobs that was more open than just commercial archaeology. And because we had to work with different partners, we kind of set up the nonprofit, and then we applied for the grant together with the Flanders Fields Museum, but also with Ghent University, and then two or three companies, commercial companies, and that was all brought together into that nonprofit to do that study. So the money came in within the nonprofit, and then was we paid the partners to do their part of the research. And now the Skylarcs is still existing, and we want to keep it alive because we have big ideas, and we're ambitious on it, but we lack money and time to actually progress. So it's kind of a silent nonprofit at the moment, but it's still there, and hopefully we find the money and the time at some point. But the idea is that we want to maybe do smaller dig hill 80s again, and then do excavations where people can visit, and maybe field schools or summer schools for students who want to do First World War archaeology, maybe from the UK or that have no battlefield or First World War battlefield within the boundaries of the UK itself, and to give them options if they want to study it. For example, Glasgow University has the well-known conflict archaeology. So maybe we can work together there. I know working with veterans is something that we also think about. So we have a lot of ideas, but hopefully at some point we will be able to make that happen. But at this moment, I have to be honest, it's kind of silent with Skylarks. But we want to keep it alive, just to not bury that idea.
But one of the things that was certainly made a big noise, that certainly wasn't silent, was with the Dig Hill 80 project. So absolutely fascinating, brilliant outreach as well, which is what we try and do in the Shindig. It's like, it's easy for us to be interested in it in a very small community, but ultimately you've got to get it out there. And this is an amazing crowdfunded project, and it's an amazing site. I think you've talked about it in the past. It allows you to see 1914 to 1918 on a single site, and the preservation levels are fantastic. So can you just tell us a little about where it is, the battles it was involved in, and some, what you found really, and anything else you want to say about the project more generally?
It's situated on the edge of the village of Rijksgaten, or White Sheet, as it's known by the British soldiers. So it's on that southern salient, the Messine Ridge salient. So you have the two towns that were held by the Germans from the end of 1914 until the summer of 1917. And on the northern edge, you have Rijksgaten. And I think in 2015, we first ended up there doing trial trenching, because an area about 1.3 hectares big was about to be developed. There was a housing estate that was be added to the town there on the edge of the town. And already during trial trenching, we felt that the site had something special. The preservation, because half of the site you could already see it before we started digging, that hasn't been or wasn't touched until or since the war, and was still you have that first half was flat, and you could see that they plowed it and activities were done. But on the other side, you have it was known in the town for the kids to ride their bikes, because it was that uneven, and it was nice to go cycling there. And secondly, it has a fantastic view because it's on the edge of Rijksgaten, and Rijksgaten is on the edge of the ridge. And from there, you can see Ypres, the spires of Ypres, and the entire battlefield can be seen from that side. So we already felt that the position itself and then the preservation was kind of special. And then the results of the trial trenching showed that we had a lot of trenches that were preserved quite deep. And we already had several locations where we found human remains, more than on average you would find during trial trenching. Whenever you go on the battlefield in Ypres, you will find human remains. Even during trial trenches, there's a big chance. But often that's just fragments or one location, but there we had several locations, and especially on the area that wasn't touched since the war. And then, of course, we were working there, and the gardens of the houses that were there around it ended up on that area, and several locals approached us and they said, "Oh, what's going to happen?" And yeah, and they always said there's an entire army buried under this field, and we were like, well, okay, it's maybe just a talk, as many talks are there around the town. But a few trenches later, we did find a large pit with several points where we had remains. So we thought, okay, this is not just a regular grave, but there's at least a few soldiers in there. So at the end of that trial trenching, we felt that there's no other option than to excavate the entire site. But the guys that wanted to develop, of course, were not so enthusiastic about paying for archaeology, although they have to. I have to stress out that there was no option for them then not to continue or to pay for archaeology. But as it often goes, then, as I said before, you have to select and you have to make choices. And I didn't want to make choices there. So we had eventually ended up with the idea of the crowdfunding. And again, I want to stress out that the developers didn't escape their part. So they did pay for, we did give them a small discount because we had to get them on board, but they still paid a large amount of what they had legally had to be or had to pay. But with the crowdfunding, we had the idea if we find a lot of money on top of that, we can look at the site in detail and do whatever is necessary for the soldiers that we'll probably find, and then to excavate it properly. And the advantage of crowdfunding is that one, you collect money, but you automatically engage people because you give them rewards for the money that they put into. And that's when we started to think, how can we engage them? We can just let them follow online, or we can let them come to a guided tour and see archaeologists at work, because often on regular excavations, as you probably know, it's not easy. You have those open days, but that's often in the weekends or at the evenings when nobody's at work, and you just see a site but no archaeologists at work. So we wanted to give those tours during working hours so that they could see us and the colleagues at work. And then there's also the option, we gave the option of people that paid more to be actually an archaeologist for a day or a week, whatever the amount was that they paid. And then, it started off slow, but at some point we got some interest from YouTubers and other people that started to spread the story. And for a long time, it looked like we wouldn't make the target, or we wouldn't hit the target, but eventually I think we aimed for 140,000 euros and we ended up with 180,000. And I think in the last week, it just exploded and the money started to come in, and then we could go ahead. And we were there for 3 full months. We had several guided tours a day, 20 to 30 people volunteering to be an archaeologist for a day or 2 days or whatever. So many that with the core team that we had in mind, we were not, we were understaffed. So we invited professional archaeologists to come as volunteer. We couldn't pay, but we asked them, yeah, do you want to join? And so that we had people that had some knowledge of what we were doing, so that we could continue. Because we were only 5, and if you had to guide all those volunteers, there was no work done. You would not get the work done as it was supposed to be done. So yeah, it was a fantastic experience because we were there often with 20 to 40 people. From all kinds of nationalities. We had people from America, Russia, all over Europe, and they'd all came just to that one little town in Flanders to help us, and we shared experience, and I get to know a lot of people that still I'm in touch with today. So besides the results that I'll get into, but the experience itself and the way we were engaging people and how if it was that easy, I would do it again tomorrow, but unfortunately it isn't. But yeah, it took a lot of my time. I underestimated a lot of things. I learned a lot of things. If I would do it again, so many things would be different, but I don't regret anything from on the other side as well. So it's the way people were, and then I had to. I still remember we promised people to give updates daily, but I wasn't used to. When we started, we didn't really have a good idea of how to do it, so we just used what we had, and there was Facebook Live. So every day I just went live and I went around with my camera on my phone and speaking to people what we did today and what I showed them. And at the beginning, I was like probably very stumbling and it was not worth to watch. But by the end, I started to get a hang of it, and the viewers went up and people started to like it, and it was just a great experience. And then we're not even talking about the archaeology. We had a trench network around a mill site, so we had the house of the miller and his barns. We had the steam mill site, and that was connected with trenches. There were bunkers in the cellars that were preserved. We had the trenches themselves from different kinds of periods, and then we had the soldiers, and in total we had 112 bodies that we recovered from that 1 hectare that we eventually excavated. I have to add that not all 112 of them are complete bodies, because that's the reality of a battlefield, that bodies get smashed up, and some of them you just find dispersed bones, and sometimes it's just a few fragments that you'll never have any chance of identification, even not a nationality. But we do count every individual, and we count with the minimal number of individuals system, and then that's how we end up. Because at the beginning we had 135 or something that we counted, but then physical anthropologists with an MNI ended up with 112. And then that was a surprising thing, that about 70 of them were German. That was not a surprise, but I think 80% of those were killed in 1914. And we always thought at the beginning that the Messine Ridge is known from the battle on the 7th of June 1917 with the explosion of the mines, and that we would find a lot of evidence from that battle. And when we found remains, we thought that must be from that major battle then. But at the end, we did almost there was almost no evidence of the 1917 battle. We had or 1914 or 1918. And then, yeah, of course, that's the nice thing about archaeology, because there's so much written about the Messina Ridge attack on June 7, 1917, that all those other battles kind of are forgotten in history because they get overshadowed by one or two major battles. But then if you look into it, that 1914 battle must have been at least as horrific as 1917. Thousands and thousands of German inexperienced troops just got massacred there by running into Allied lines and trying to push them out of the village. And they were all Bavarians, and Weizgate is kind of the Langemark for the Prussians, with the myths of the students running into the British experienced soldiers there. They had those Bavarians were also inexperienced young guys, poorly equipped with, and that was something that we found on the bodies, with equipment that was long forgotten in a depot and that they pulled out just to arm them and to put them into, to make them kind of ready for battle. And there's accounts of for several units, over 6,000 missing still around the village alone. So yeah, and we found two mass graves, with one of 26 of those Bavarians and the other one 18, I think. And we were able to identify one with certainty, and the other one, we had two ID tags. One was on a body, and it matched. Well, afterwards, we found out the age and stature from the physical anthropology matched the person who we supposed to be on, based on the ID tag. The other ID tag was in between bodies, so we could not tell who he was. And the Germans don't do DNA research afterwards, so we assume he was in the grave, but we don't know which set of remains was that person. But the guy that was identified was Georg Pilhofer, I think was his name. And he was only 17 when he was killed there. So that makes you think when you're, at that point I had my brother was 17, and I looked at him as a very young, a young guy, not being able to march up and do stuff like that. But then at the same time, there he was, miles away from home in a forgotten grave. So yeah, that's the thing that that hits you. And yeah, we had to be, and especially there's no, during the day I had no time to reflect on any emotions, because it was hectic and everything had to be done. But then that's the moments when you drive home and you start to, and I still have that, because people often say, don't you get used to it? Because I think I have over it's 220 225 bodies that I've recovered till now, but I still don't get, you still have that same, the same with the Frenchman. We also had the name on him because of the ID tag, and you get into his life. You have now you don't just have a set of remains, but you have a name, you have a person. Doesn't mean the others aren't persons, of course. They even if I don't find a name, I do try to find out as much as possible to retell their story. If I have a unit, I try to tell the story of that unit. So what might have happened to him, so at least it's a person that experienced death and faced death eventually, and that's still more than just pull him out and put him in a grave. That's very black and white, but we have the possibility to tell their stories.
Yeah.
So we have to do that as much as we can. I think it's I see it as my responsibility as.
It's very obvious from hearing you talk how much you care about these people, and it's fascinating. I think from any conflict archaeologist we've spoken to on this, I find that it's labeled as conflict archaeology to be a bit misleading, because all the people seem to be interested in the people rather than the actual conflict. It's the personal stories. It's amazing. So like, you've worked on a lot of these projects. What are some of the more remarkable survivals that you've excavated, or some of your colleagues have excavated?
Well, the question gets harder and harder because we found so many stuff. A few years ago, I just had a few things that I could say, but the one thing that still comes to me as one of the most remarkable things is the German backpack that we found near Langemark, and within the backpack we had the remains of a cuddly toy. So we had the eyes and the 4 feet of something that was, I think it was a mole.
Yeah.
But that soldier had, or it was his, or it was from his kids. Of course we cannot tell, but that is so far apart to have a cuddly toy and then being on a battlefield where people kill each other. But it still says so much about those people there, which is not numbers and stuff that are in the history books, but they are sons, fathers with kids, emotions. So for me, will always, or for a long time, be the number one. And because again, it's that's emotional thing, and I think you hit the right thing by saying that we care more about, in my case at least, and I think a lot of my colleagues do, and other from Flanders, but about all conflict archaeologists, that the people care are more of interest for us than the conflict. I'm not the guy that wants to. Yeah, I'm. Of course, I'm thrilled if you find a well-preserved rifle or whatever, but I'm not the guy that collects rifles or walks around in uniforms. It's the story of the people. I'm not interested in it because of the war and the fighting, but because of what happened to them, and maybe more to tell that story, and hopefully to. And that sounds so cliche and stuff, but to make people reflect on the horrific sides of, or the horrific part of the war.
No, that really does come across. Listening to you talk, it really comes across.
I was just going to say that there. I mean, there are other questions we could ask, but if people want to see your research and what you found and more about the stories of the identification of the people, they can follow you on Twitter, X. Just how can people follow you and just keep track of your research, and how can we help if there's anything upcoming that we can, if there's more crowdfundings in future or any plans, or just just tell us that, because people are going to be listening to this, and I didn't think I'd be so emotionally affected. As I say, I've dug up personal effects in the Second World War, and that's kind of almost sometimes listening to you sound a little bit traumatized, and on a very small scale, I know what that feels like, having done it on just on a few digs. So I think people are going to be really fascinated with this emotional connection and what you've been telling us about the people and discovering this. How can people basically read more of your information, essentially?
I think most of the stuff that I post will be on X. I try to, but I'm always limited to what I can. So if I'm able to post, I will. But sometimes we, of course, in commercial archaeology, we work for people that pay for us to do the job. And if they say we are not allowed to post anything, then I cannot do it. I have a lot of the reports that I've written on my academia page most of them are in Dutch, or almost all of them, but you get a good idea of course, there's a lot of pictures in it, and an idea of what's found. And the Hill 80 report is almost finished, and I really want to get it translated, because I need to. It's from out of Flemish law, we have to hand it in Dutch. But and I have a lot of people that will be willing to help. I want to get it translated so I can, I can make it possible for the people that backed us back then to read it and to see what's found and what the results are of the excavation, more than just what the snippets that they saw during the excavation. Yeah, that's one of the great things of Hill 80, was that we had so many people there that they found everything, where usually because of time pressure, sometimes parts get missed, or you have to make choices. You cannot trowel out every feature. And now that was done, and everything was documented by GPS. So we have heat maps and stuff with where cartridges were fired and stuff, and that's the great stuff that is in the reports, right? And also the pictures of the finds and stuff. So I really would like to share that with everyone that backed us, but everybody who's interested as well into it as well. So hopefully, because it's something I need to do in my spare time, so that's why it takes some more longer than I want to, but I'm always have a go for the Flemish version, and then I can translate, and hopefully within the following weeks I'll be able to post that I can share the English version with everyone.
That'd be fantastic. And the one question I was going to ask was, and I won't ask it, but I'll just say that the heat map research that you did at Hill 80, the different date stamps on the spent cartridges between 1914 and through to 1918, just a revelation and just a new way of looking. I know another person, Ryan McNutt, that we had on a previous podcast, and is doing a skirmish near Camp Lawton in the American Civil War. And to see these heat maps and, finding out where particular units were vis-a-vis where the history tells us they might have been, or the regimental diaries is. So for that alone, people, I would say this is something that you want to read. And it's the X account is one of my favorites, and has been for years. We'll put all the details out for that. Just contact us in future if you ever want to do an update. I think, as I say, it's been emotional, as they say, and it's not being flippant, because I think it really was, to hear the emotion in your voice sometimes, and I know a little bit what that felt like was, just makes it one of our best podcasts we've done. So I'll just say, on behalf of Red River Archaeology Group and the Shindig, and I'm sure Luke will say just a bit at the end, but for me personally, thank you very much, Simon Verdegem, and we can't wait to see more of your research in the future. But Luke, just to take us out.
I don't think I can say anything better. It was incredible. This is a subject I know the basics about, what you learn in school essentially, but hearing you talk about it, it's something that I definitely want to look into more. From, as you say, not necessarily the conflict, but the people involved in it. So it's definitely something I'm going to look into more.
So thank you. Thank you. No, thank you so much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
It's still, I mean, we're recording this outro a few months after we recorded this, but it's a podcast that I've often thought back to me as a reference in this as well. I've been in conflict archaeology sites where you find personal effects of airmen, in my case, and soldiers and Marines, and in Simon's case as well. And I think I was saying at the start of the podcast that his connection, I think it's the most emotional podcast that we've had, Luke, and I know you were kind of as affected as Simon and I were when we find these things in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's that kind of a thing of, I guess, coming at this from not being an archaeologist, which is my role in this podcast, my knowledge of wars like this are what I learned in school and films, which tend to romanticize a lot of this stuff sometimes. But actually hearing it be described and seeing the emotion in this of what was found and this history and it seeming so real, you I think we're all guilty of forgetting that these things are real and it's not just a film, it's not just a book, a story that we tell each other. This happened in our history, it's real life, and seeing the people uncover this, feeling that, and I guess that kind of made me really start to assess these situations a little bit more and look at them a little bit from the human aspect of it, of how horrible these conditions were for the people who would have been involved in these from day one, and how lucky we are in a sense to be able to get to look at these things and hopefully learn from these things both as humans and historically, obviously.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you're talking about learning from it and looking at things with a fresh perspective. But even myself, and I was, growing up a sort of huge fan of All Quiet on the Western Front, the novel, and the films as well. And I think that's a book I will now read again in view of this, because I think, very impressed with the quality of the archaeology is
Yeah.
it's fantastic. You can see it from the photographs and the care that Simon has as well. But yeah, I think, the takeaway, I think, is just that emotional connection that, you essentially get teenagers and people in their 20s that are just horrific circumstances. And yeah, I think, Simon was saying was that, you will be connected to that if you do that sort of work. And hopefully, again, we've given an insight, a little hint of what that's like. And, that there's always temptation as these generations go by, war becomes more and more romanticized.
Yeah.
And then, you get really brought back down to the horrific realities of it. We're in a world now where trench warfare is again a feature of Europe. So it's this is, I think, is a very timely look at this sort of research as well. But yeah, no, thank you so much to Simon and all his colleagues in the local communities, in the areas that he's worked as well. And yeah, we hope, and joy's not the right word, but we hope you, I think, appreciate this podcast and what we're trying to do to spread the word of these amazing archaeologists and what they do for the local communities where they work, and also, again, the international communities when you've got soldiers from all over the world. Yeah, so I say enjoy is the wrong word, but I think that's just, it's had an impact on me, this podcast.
Yeah, me too. And if it had an impact on you, and if it's something that that you're interested in, please give us a like, give us a subscribe, leave us a comment on what you thought of this episode, and maybe check back through our archives. There's lots and lots of amazing interviews with different archaeologists in different various fields that you will find interesting. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to let us know what you thought, and we'll be back again with a new episode shortly.
Thank you very much.